For more Magic the Gathering resources, check out my friends at paperchampion.net and Kitchen Table MTG.
Hey everybody, this is Tao at The Forge, and today I wanted to do a video just doing a recap of some of the cards in my Peasant cube. Now, recently I had a chance to run like a match and where I was just watching how people were playing, and so I was actually able to walk around the table as people were drafting the cube and playing it out. Of course, I didn't really jump in and offer advice because that wouldn't really be fair if I can see everyone else's cards, but I was able to see how people were playing and what they were choosing and even talk to them and talk about their decisions. And it was actually pretty enlightening. It's something I would encourage people who are making Cube to do. So here's some of the results. Now, first of all, the deck that ended up winning was a Simic deck of all things. I wasn't of all the decks, I was not expecting a blue-green deck to win. And thinking about it, there's actually a lot of great stuff in blue and in green. So the player was mainly playing a lot of blue creatures, but they also had a few green ones as well that were just pretty good. Now, just a couple things before I go into those colors. One comment that I kept hearing is, as people were drafting the cube, was people were saying how did nobody pick this? Right, so that's actually a great thing to hear, because what it means to me is that you have people they're on their sixth pick going around the table, and still there's great stuff in there, and they're why aren't people even picking these things? Because it means that there's not just a ton of jank in there. There's some really good stuff. So anyways, let's go back to blue here. And the reason why some of the really ones that stood out was Mistblade Shinobi. Now, Mistblade Shinobi is a 3-mana 1/1 that you can ninjutsu, and then basically ninjutsu means that when a creature attacks, if it's not blocked, then you can just pay the ninjutsu cost and switch this creature for the other creature. Okay, when it deals combat damage to a player, you may return target creature that player controls to its owner's hand. Now, it doesn't seem that great, all right, but one thing is that this is a repeatable effect. Right, so it doesn't say when you ninjutsu it. It just says whenever Mistblade Shinobi deals combat damage to a player, you may return target creature that player controls to their hand. Right, so throughout the match, anytime Mistblade Shinobi does any damage at all to someone, then basically you can return one of their creatures. Now, that player also drafted Ninja of the Deep Hours. Okay, so Ninja of the Deep Hours is essentially the same thing, a little bit like the big brother of Mistblade Shinobi, and it says whenever Ninja of the Deep Hours deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card, right? So, and then the player was actually able to kind of play them both off of each other. So they would actually play Ninja. They played Ninja of the Deep Hours first, and then later on they used the Mistblade Shinobi, right? And then what's it called? And then when it comes into play, you return an unblocked attacker to your hand. So they were actually able to play these two back and forth off each other. So the person played Ninja of the Deep Hours, then into Mistblade Shinobi, then back to Ninja of the Deep Hours, then back to Mistblade Shinobi. And there's always people on the board that didn't have blockers or would tap out all their blockers and allow this to happen. Or else the opponent, they also had things that were just unblockable. And it just created a really, really great synergy there. Some things that really, really helped a lot, as I suspected, late game. This only came out late game, but I think it would have been better early, but still was pretty good, was Land Tax. Okay, so Land Tax was a pretty huge card. It did really well. Whereas a Ghostly Prison, right? So that's an enchantment. Ghostly Prison was a superstar. It made attacking the player who played it, super, super difficult. This player actually played a 4-color deck and was able to make it work, and was actually pretty. It was almost broken how bad it was. It was just really difficult to attack this person, and overall, Ghostly Prison was really a superstar. Another player played Una's Blackguard, and a funny thing is they actually tried to do a 1/1 counters build, but they didn't get a lot of creatures. But Una's Blackguard was just such a superstar. basically what happened was they tried to do a Voltron build off of this. So they played Una's Blackguard, and then they put some counters on it using where is it here? It is not Retreat to Kazandu. So they're playing green black. And so it says whenever a land enters the battlefield, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature. So so they played turn 2, turn 2 Una's Blackguard, turn 3 Retreat to Kazandu, and then played a land on turn 4, put a counter on Una's Blackguard, and then every time they played Una's Blackguard, then Una's Blackguard would force that opponent to discard a card. And because it was flying, no one else really had flying, so Una's Blackguard could continue to attack with impunity pretty much throughout the whole match. It was really, really difficult to get rid of this card. And one of the cool things is that they played is they put a Banshee's Blade on it. Right, Banshee's Blade turned out to be really good too. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each charge counter on Banshee's Blade. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage, put a charge counter on this card. So basically what this means is like, the first time it does damage, it doesn't do anything. But the second time it actually does more, like it does 1 and then 2 and then 3, and it just builds up. But if the creature dies, those counters stay on the Banshee's Blade. They don't come off like as they would with the creature. And so the next time you attach this to a creature, it just continues getting bigger and bigger. Especially when you have something with evasion, it works really, really well. And then if you can combine that with, where is it here? With the Golgari one, where is his Winding Constrictor. So if one or more counters would be placed on an artifact or creature you control, that many counters +1 are placed on there. So when they played it with the Winding Constrictor, it would actually work out really, really well. Now, a couple of things I noticed. Like those ones are really just kind of superstars in the deck. There are other ones that were just good cards and, turned out to be pretty strong, like Gurmag Angler was pretty good. Marshmith's Titan was okay, but the person didn't, they had it in their hand, they could never play it out. One that I was a little bit discouraged about was Liliana's Spectre. So Liliana's Spectre is a 3-mana 2/1 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. The reason why is because, it's a flying 2/1, and everyone has to discard a card, which they're going to hate. But first of all, what it's going to do is it attracts a lot of negative attention to you as a player. So on turn 3, you put this out and you force everyone to discard, and then everybody's looking at you and wants to kill you because they're just so mad. But you might only have this 2/1, and like if it was a Death Toucher, it might be better. But I don't know. I wasn't too keen on it, and I might look for a replacement. Not sure about it. But it's not awful, but it wasn't really that great either. Let's see. Another superstar that comes to mind was this Curse of Predation. Curse of Predation is a 3-mana enchantment where you can enchant one of the players. Whenever a creature attacks an enchanted player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, the person who had this counter cast on them actually had, I believe it was Nature's Claim, so they could destroy it right away. But the problem is, like, as soon as the player who put this out put it onto a player, you could see all the other players around the table, like, just eyeing that one. Like, it was immediate. They were all just like, okay, now, sorry, we're going to have to attack you. Because to get a +1/+1 counter on every one of your creatures, it was just awful. And the funny thing is, like, that person was tapped out, and they only had, it was the deck with the Voltron Una's Blackguard build that had this put on them. Luckily, they had a way to get rid of it, but really, like, if they didn't, everyone would have attacked them. Like, seriously, everyone on the table was going to, like, look at them and saying, like, okay, sorry, we don't mean to bully you, but we pretty much have to attack you now. So this card was a really, really good card to have in there. Now, one thing I noticed was that no one really ever played no one really played any of the vehicles. especially the big vehicles like the Consulate Dreadnought, where you can cruise 6. The reason why is because there's not really any jank here, and not a lot of people were playing the tokens builds, and so really, like, why would you tap one of your really good creatures that might have evasion or something like that, just to get this out, right? So like, I might look at replacing replacing the vehicles. I thought they'd be used a lot more, but none of the players pretty much ever used any of the vehicles at all. And one player did use one vehicle once, but then they almost immediately regretted it because they had to tap out all their creatures and then tap this to attack. And then they were left defenseless. So I don't know. I think that these are maybe a bad choice. So I'll think about it, and I might look at replacing these with, maybe just some better artifacts or better weapons, like equipment or things like that. Let's see. The Isochron Scepter. People noticed that this was a mythic rare, but I believe it was printed as an uncommon, and so that's why it's in there. It wasn't broken. I thought it would be broken, but the person who selected this did not abuse it. They could have. I guess they may have been able to abuse it, but they didn't get anything good to put on it, and so it just never got abused. So that was actually good to see, though that still remains to be seen. Like, the thing is, like, Isochron Scepter put onto, like, 2 mana like a Servo Exhibition. Sorry, that's a sorcery. Has to be onto, like, Raise the Alarm, an instant. Alright, so 2 mana, you could 2 mana Raise the Alarm and do that every single turn, or you could put that onto, like, a Fatal Push or Counterspell. So I think there is maybe some room for abuse there, so I have to keep my eye on that one. But overall, it was pretty good. One that people really, really hated was Skullrend. Skullrend, like, when this came out, okay, the person who had it had selected stuff just too high on the curve, and so they couldn't actually get most of their stuff out early. So they were just sitting there. But the good thing is that when they're just sitting there, like, no one's really attacking them because they're just not a threat. Right? Like, they're too busy attacking and dealing with other people's threats than to attack this person. So the person just was able to sit there for almost like 5 turns. But as soon as they cast Skullrend, right, deal 2 damage to each opponent, they didn't really care about that. But then discarding 2 cards at random was just awful, because by this time everyone only had like maybe 3 cards in their hand, except for the person playing Ninja of the D powers. But everyone was like getting ready to combo off and like had all these things going, and they're all excited. And then discard 2 cards at random just like wrecked everyone's plans. That's really great. I mean, it means that the card is really good, but it immediately drew attention to that player, and then that player wasn't around for very long afterwards. All right, so anyway, Skullrend I think is a good card. It's a good one to keep in. Just the reaction from all the other players was just utter misery, and that just means that it's a good card. All right. Now, a lot of these red enchantments, they were not really, or red instants, they weren't really taken, but I think that they maybe could have been. I think if someone had chosen a different build, okay, so like if they had gotten the Young Pyro or something like that, then they might have been better overall. Now, here's some of the observations I have about things that we might want to look at as far as the cube goes. I found that Red's curve, the red creatures were relatively weak compared to the rest, right? So, like Knight of Meadowgrain was really, really great, especially because the player who played Knight of Meadowgrain also had a Johnny's Pridemate. So Knight of Meadowgrain is a life linker, also a first striker, so it's really hard to get rid of, and then it combos well with a Johnny's Pridemate. So those two worked really, really well. And they also playing a sort of they were playing a tokens build with Unruly Mob, so that actually worked out really well as well. So white has some good synergy. Blue, I just talked about, was awesome. Black, again, had pretty much good stuff. Like the Vampire Nighthawk was a good pick. Una's Blackguard worked out really well. Nizumi Grave Robber wasn't played out, but I still think like the person had a good plan for it. Accursed Witch unfortunately wasn't played out either, but I think again it's very similar to its effect is very similar to the Curse of Predation. So I think overall, like, those would be good ones to play. Green had, some really good stuff with Strangleroot Geist, Obsessive Skinner. Actually, no, Hermit of the Natternals was a superstar. It actually did really, really well. Carapace Forger, was just okay. I might, if I have some 0 mana artifacts, then I might play Carapace Forger. Like, Carapace Forger might make more sense. Same thing with all the other things with Affinity. Those ones are a little bit weaker, so it's something I might have to look into as well. So you can see, like, all the colors worked out pretty well, except for red. Now, the person playing red had a Lightning Berserker. Like, they actually got Lightning Berserker out, but the rest of the cards were just kind of meh. Like, they were okay, but not really that great. All right, so here's the reason why I realized is because basically it's about repeatability of effects, right? So let's take, for instance, you got something like Mist Meadow's Skulk. All right, so a lifelinker with protection from converted mana cost 3 or greater. So it's just a 1/1, right? But basically that protection sits around for a while, right? It sits, well, not a while, it just sits around all the time. And that lifelink sits around all the time. So if one of your opponents is ever has just 3 mana creatures or greater, or let's just say they've tapped out or whatever, you can send this little guy in, do 1 damage, and you get 1 life back. Right, so that's a repeatable effect, and people really like that. Okay, same thing with Lone Rider, with it being a first striker, Knight of Meadowgrain. Again, they're first striker all the time, right? Taking a look here, Manic Scribe actually milled one of the players out. Basically, because you're playing only 40 card decks, milling someone 3 cards per turn is actually really harsh on them. The people were actually able to get Delirium online fairly easily, so I was actually surprised about it. But yeah, they were, almost everybody who had any Delirium cards were able to get Delirium online. So things like this have the same repeated effects. Okay, so same thing with Looter Ilkor, Invisible Stalker. These things are just useful all the time. Okay, Night Market Lookout, same thing. Nezumi Grave Robber, Una's Blackguard, all good stuff. All right. Now the problem is, going into Experiment 1 Sedge Scorpion, again, same thing. The problem with red is, yes, you have red, but this is a 1/1 for 1, but you constantly have to pay mana to pump it. So it means you can't cast anything else at the time. And then some of these other ones, you have Gibbering Fiend, deals 1 damage to each opponent. Okay, great. The player who was playing this couldn't get it out, first of all, because they just didn't draw it. But I guess maybe they'd be able to do this because it has Delirium. A better example would be this Gorehouse Chainwalker. So it comes in, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on it, but then it can't block. All right, so now you have basically a 2 mana 3/2, which is above curve, but the problem is it doesn't do anything else. Right, so it's just a 2 mana 3/2. It's pretty much like a vanilla creature all the time, right? Same thing with people that had a hard time playing Thermal Alchemist. That could again just be because of the build, but Splatter Thug, I guess, is the same thing. Basically, it's a 3 mana 3/3 with First Strike. Now it's good that it has First Strike, but other than that, it's just not really that great. Something like Valakut Predator is actually a lot better because it requires you to get a lot of lands, and so when you have lands come in, then it gets +2/+2. That's actually pretty strong, especially if you combine it with some of the retreat cycles. Let's see. There were some other good ones here. There was one that Terra Ravager was actually really strong as well. But a lot of these red cards, they just come in and they don't do anything else after they come in. So here's, take a look, Fangtum Kavu. That's actually a pretty good card. Enters the battlefield, deals 4 damage to target creature. Okay, well, great. So you killed a creature on the battlefield. That's awesome, right? But the problem now is that you paid 4 mana, and you just got basically a generic 4/2. It doesn't actually blink back and doesn't do anything afterwards. So there's not anything repeatable over and over again. And, destroying one creature on one person is not really backbreaking or anything. And, compare that to some of the other 4 mana cards, right? So let's see, 4 mana, you get Accursed Witch, or Squelching Leeches, power and toughness equal to the number of swamps you control. 4 mana is Ninja of the Deep Hours, Seraph of the Dawn, right? These 4 mana cards, Acidic Slime, destroying someone's land or enchantment, that could be really, really strong. right? 5/4 Arborback Stomper gives you 5 life and has trample, so it's a monster that just constantly has trample. I would rather have Arborback Stomper. Well, that's a 5 mana, but I would rather have Arborback Stomper over a Flame Tongue Kavu any day. Even if it is 1 mana more. So I think what I need to do is I need to kind of revamp a little bit of stuff in red, give it a little more repeatability. Like Boldweir Intimidator was strong, or is strong because it can constantly do stuff. But at 7 mana, it's actually extremely hard to get out, right? So like this is one like an example of a card that's really good but very rarely played, mainly because you just can't get this guy out a lot. It could have been the players inexperience, but maybe if they chosen more of these dual lands, the Boros Garrison, Azorius Chancery, or something like that, then maybe they could have got that guy out faster. But overall, I thought, those ones are just kind of meh. So red, I think, needs a little bit of work. Right. Going back over to the artifact creatures, there were some that were just okay again, like Peace Strider. Okay, people thought it was just okay, but they didn't think it was really a great card. This was never it was almost like a last pick or a second last pick every cards like this were almost a second last pick every time. Right, 4 mana 3/3, you gain 3 life. Okay. Right, same thing with this one. Target opponent loses 3 life. That's 1 player out of 6 or 5 opponents, so not really huge. Chief of the Foundry, no one played an artifact deck, so this did not really come into play too much. So, anyways, those are just some of my observations from the cube. Overall, I think everyone told me they had a really good time. It was nice for them. They commented on how nice the sleeves were, and it was nice. I've got all their proper tokens, so it was nice for them to play with the tokens. But overall, I noticed all of the colors are fairly well balanced, except for red. So I think I'm going to need to do a little bit of work here, take a look at some of the red cards, and there will probably be an update coming up where I've made some modifications to red here. Anyways, that's it. If you have any other I'd invite you guys to look at the cube. I'll put the link in the deck in the video description. Take a look, and if you have any suggestions at any time, let me know. Cube is the kind of thing that you're always trying to improve. So let me know if you can think of anything that would go better in there. Anyways, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.